Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into the source material on a really fascinating aircraft from World War II, the Mitsubishi G4M bomber.
That's right. Known to the Allies as the Betty. But, well, it quickly picked up a much darker nickname, didn't it? The Flying Zippo.
Exactly, and it's such a contradiction. I mean, this plane gave Japan this incredible strategic reach at first, but then the crew started experiencing just horrific losses.
Yeah. And the key to understanding both sides of that coin, the amazing range and the terrible vulnerability, it really came to light in January 45.
Right, that discovery at Clark Air Base in the Philippines, Major Frank T. McCoy, he found an intact Betty, tail number 76312.
An intelligence coup, really.
And when he looked inside, especially at the wings, well, it was pretty shocking.
What did you find?
Just nothing. The wings held thousands of liters of fuel, right?
Right.
There was zero protection. Just 2 millimeters of aluminum skin, that's it.
2 millimeters, wow.
And this wasn't battle damage. This is how it was built.
And McCoy realized, didn't he? This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight.
Yeah.
It was a choice, a deliberate design philosophy, something completely alien to Western military thinking at the time.
Absolutely. So that's our mission for this deep dive, right? We're unpacking that trade-off.
Exactly. The brutal math, basically. That led to the Betty's incredible 6,000-kilometer range.
But at what cost?
At the cost of the crew's lives. That range was bought with their survivability.
Okay, so let's start with that range. Because early on, the Betty's performance, it was undeniable. A game changer in 1941.
Oh, absolutely. Nothing could touch it initially.
Think about December 8th, 1941, just hours after Pearl Harbor. While the U.S. is still trying to figure out what's happening, 82 G4M and G3M bombers take off from Formosa, fly 460 miles to Clark Field.
Complete surprise. High-altitude approach.
And in 45 minutes, they just devastate the place. 17 B-17s gone, almost all the fighters destroyed on the ground.
And the Bettys. They flew home, untouched, beyond reach.
That reach was key. But it wasn't just about hitting distant targets, was it? It was about lethality, too.
Definitely. Just 2 days later, December 10th, off Malaya, Force Z.
The Prince of Wales and the Repulse.
Yeah.
Heavy hitters.
Capital ships, actively maneuvering, guns blazing, and it didn't matter. 26 G4Ms carrying these huge 840-kilo Type 91 torpedoes.
And they sank them. How long did it take?
Less than 2 hours. Both ships gone. First time in history that capital ships defending themselves on the open sea were sunk purely by air power.
Just staggering. That must have sent shockwaves.
It shattered British naval power in Asia practically overnight. And for the next 6 months, the Allies, well, they couldn't really hit back effectively.
Because the Japanese bases were too far away.
Exactly. The Betty could strike Darwin, Australia from bases 1,500 miles out. Their own bases were safe, built around this plane's incredible range.
So the range gave them the initiative.
It did. But that advantage had a hidden clock built into it. That performance was only really sustainable as long as they had surprise and faced, limited opposition.
Which brings us to mid-1942, because the tide starts to turn. The Americans bring in better fighters. Hellcats, Corsairs.
And they've learned how the Japanese fight. Suddenly, Betty crews are reporting losses that are just alarming, way higher than expected.
Yeah, the Guadalcanal campaign seems like a real turning point, August 1942.
Brutal. There was one mission, August 8th. 23 G4Ms fly out from Repulse, intercepted over Savo Island.
And the result?
18 shot down out of 23, just like that. A catastrophic loss rate. Something was fundamentally wrong with the aircraft's survivability.
Yeah, and Allied pilots were noticing it too, weren't they? Talking about how easily they went down?
Yeah, Lieutenant Commander John Thomas Blackburn said something like, they couldn't believe how easily they burned. A few hits near the wings or fuselage.
Boom. Instant fireball.
Exactly. Not tough at all. Explosive, which is where those nicknames came from. Flying cigar, 1 shot later.
And the most famous one, the Flying Zippo.
That's the one.
Yeah.
And intelligence units started confirming why. They examined wreckage, captured examples.
Like McCoy's discovery later.
Right. They found nearly 4,800 liters of fuel capacity, 8 tanks, and 0 protection. No armor around them, no fire suppression systems, and crucial...
So self-sealing tanks.
None at all. Just that thin aluminum skin.
Which is such a contrast to Allied doctrine. American planes, the B-17, B-24, they all had self-sealing tanks.
Standard procedure. Even though it added significant weight, maybe 500 kilos or more per plane.
But for the U.S., crew survival was paramount, non-negotiable.
Whereas the Betty's design, it came from the opposite calculation entirely. You have to trace it back to the Japanese Navy's requirement in September 1937.
What did they ask for?
something almost impossible at the time, an unloaded range of 4,722 kilometers, over 2,500 nautical miles.
That's immense for the 1930s. Sounds like they were setting the designer Kiro Honjo up for failure, or at least a very difficult choice.
Mathematically, yes. Honjo needed speed and that incredible range. Weight was the absolute enemy. Every kilo you add takes away from performance.
So armor, self-sealing tanks, all that protective weight.
It was too much. He ran the numbers. Adding those systems meant the plane couldn't meet the Navy's mandatory range requirement. It fell short.
So the only way to meet the spec was to deliberately leave out the protection.
Precisely. He stripped it all out, saved over 500 kilograms right there. And where did that weight saving go?
Straight into more fuel capacity, more range.
Exactly. It was a conscious trade. Survivability sacrificed for capability. The result was a very light aircraft for its size, 6,741 kilograms empty.
But it was all based on some pretty shaky assumptions, wasn't it?
Fatally flawed assumptions, as it turned out. Japanese planners expected a short, decisive war. They assumed they'd maintain surprise, face limited fighter opposition.
And all of those assumptions were proven wrong. Catastrophically wrong.
Yeah. When the war dragged on and American industry kicked into high gear with better fighters, the Betty was horribly exposed.
And the cost shows up in these really high-profile, tragic losses, like Admiral Yamamoto's assassination in April '43.
A perfect example. P-38 Lightnings flew an incredibly long mission, over 400 miles, just to intercept him.
And they knew exactly where to shoot.
They knew the Betty's weakness, target the wings near the fuel tanks. His G4M was hit, exploded instantly, crashed. The lack of protection guaranteed the mission's success for the Americans.
Yet the Japanese military kept flying them. Even knowing this fundamental vulnerability, that commitment to the original range requirement, it's hard to grasp.
It is. And it led to more tragedies right up to the end. Maybe the grimmest example is the Oka Kamikaze mission, March 21st, 1945.
This was the mission using the rocket-powered piloted bombs.
That's right, the MXY-7 Oka. 18 G4Ms took off, each lugging one of these heavy weapons underneath.
Which must have made them even slower, less agile.
Completely. They were sitting ducks. They needed to get within about 20 kilometers of the U.S. fleet off Okinawa to launch the Okas.
Did any make it?
Not even close. Hellcats intercepted them 100 miles out and just systematically wiped them out. All 18 G4Ms destroyed. Not a single Oka bomb launched.
Gone. How many casualties?
137 bomber crewmen and 15 Oka pilots. Killed in one go because the aircraft carrying them couldn't take even minimal damage.
Surely they tried to fix it eventually, add some protection.
They did, late in the war. And the modification itself tells you everything about the original trade-off. The G4M Model 3 came out around October 1944.
And it had
proper self-sealing fuel tanks, finally. But look at the cost to fit that protection in.
The range must have taken a hit.
A massive hit. The maximum range dropped from over 6,000 kilometers in the original model down to just 3,640 kilometers.
Wow, that's a reduction of almost 2,500 kilometers.
Yeah, over 2,000 kilometers lost. Almost 40% of its range gone just to add the protection that should have been there all along.
That really shows you how much that initial range requirement dictated everything. It was the plane's identity, bought by sacrificing safety.
Absolutely. That's how much weight the protection added. And it proves the initial decision wasn't casual. It was baked in, but it was too little, too late.
How many of those improved models were built?
Not many. Maybe 60, perhaps up to 90 or so. The vast majority of the Japanese naval air crews flying the Betty had already been lost by then, victims of that flying Zippo vulnerability.
So it really boils down to these two starkly different approaches to aircraft design.
Yeah. On one hand, the American approach, accept the weight penalty, protect the crew. Their survival rates in damaged planes were maybe 3-4 times higher.
And on the other, the Japanese approach for the Betty, driven by extreme performance needs based on flawed assumptions, prioritizing the mission requirement over the crew's lives.
And you hear it from the crews themselves. A former flight petty officer, Masuwato, said it perfectly. The Betty was a magnificent aircraft that asked us to die for its range.
Chilling, because ultimately, what good is 6,000 kilometers of range if you blow up 100 kilometers from the target?
Exactly. It meant nothing in the end.
And the Betty story has this symbolic end, doesn't it? It started the war for Japan with those devastating strikes from Clark Field.
And its very last official mission, August 19, 1945, was flying the Japanese surrender delegation. 2 G4Ms, painted white, designated Baton 1 and Baton 2.
Flying into Aishima, from symbol of reach to symbol of surrender. Full circle.
A really poignant end.
So that intact Betty found by Major McCoy back at Clark Field, it wasn't just an airplane, it was physical proof.
Proof that the vulnerability of the flying Zippo characteristic wasn't an accident or poor engineering in the usual sense.
It was the calculated cost, the price paid for chasing that impossible range requirement set way back in 1937.
Right. And that forces you, doesn't it, to think about the ethics baked into engineering, especially military engineering.
The choices made on the drawing board having life and death consequences years later.
Absolutely. When you face that choice, performance versus survivability, the Betty is such a stark lesson. If your industrial base is massive, like America's was, you can afford protection. It's a luxury you build in.
But if resources are tight,
If resources are limited, and you feel you have to buy capability by sacrificing crew lives, well, what does that choice say about the value that military culture places on its people?
That's the provocative question, isn't it?
It is. You have to ask yourself, which philosophy actually sustains an air force in the long run? The one that accepts high attrition for performance, or the one that prioritizes bringing crews home? The Betty's history, its staggering loss rate, gives a pretty clear answer.